So good to see you. I know you've not been feeling great, but it's good to see you in better health.
Pope Francis wasn't just the leader of the Catholic Church. He was a figure who consistently challenged the status quo, voiced his opinions on pressing issues, and offered his compassion to those in need. But now, the world faces his absence. In his final days, he met with U.S. Vice President JD Vance, who has recently made a revelation. This is raising questions, leaving many to wonder what was said in those final moments. But what has JD Vance said about the Pope? Join us as we take you through what JD Vance has revealed about Pope Francis that people just can't stop talking about. JD Vance's last meeting with Pope Francis. It was Easter Sunday, April 20th, 2025, when U.S. Vice President JD Vance met with Pope Francis at the Vatican. The moment was brief and symbolic. Vance was in Italy for the holiday weekend, and the meeting, though short, carried an unexpected weight. Pope Francis, appearing weak but composed, greeted him warmly. Less than a day later, the world received the heartbreaking news that Pope Francis had passed away. Suddenly, that short encounter took on a new meaning. JD Vance had just become one of the last public figures to speak with the Pope before his death. It was a moment few understood at the time, but many would soon analyze closely. And then, something else happened. Not long after the Pope's passing, JD Vance began to speak publicly about the meeting. So what did the Vice President of the United States actually say, and why are people reacting so strongly to it? Keep watching, because we're about to walk you through everything JD Vance has revealed since that historic and haunting encounter. What makes JD Vance's comments we're about to reveal even more striking is the long and often tense history between Pope Francis and the very administration Vance now represents. Just months before the Trump-Vance inauguration, Pope Francis made headlines across the world. On January 19, 2025, in a nationally televised interview aired in Italy, the Pope didn't mince his words. Speaking slowly but firmly, he called the incoming administration's plans for mass immigration raids a disgrace. Those were his exact words. The comment stunned even longtime Vatican watchers. For a pontiff known for his calm tone and diplomatic restraint, especially when it comes to world politics, this was unusually direct. He was referring to a leaked detail from Trump's transition team that outlined an aggressive plan to launch nationwide raids in immigrant-heavy cities across the country, shortly after taking office. Pope Francis didn't speak as a politician. He spoke as a pastor and as one who believed he saw moral danger in political actions. And this wasn't new. From the start of his papacy, he had clashed with conservative ideologies that prioritized borders over humanity. He was never afraid to criticize powerful governments, even the United States. This brings us to the bigger picture, the ideological differences between Pope Francis and figures like Donald Trump and JD Vance. Pope Francis leaned heavily toward progressive causes. He championed the rights of migrants, spoke out against climate denial, and warned frequently about the dangers of capitalism without conscience. In 2020, he even penned an encyclical titled Fratelli Tutti, calling for a better kind of politics centered on compassion and global solidarity. By contrast, JD Vance made his name as a sharp cultural conservative. His book, Hillbilly Elegy, catapulted him into the national spotlight, painting a raw, unapologetic portrait of working-class America. Later, as a senator and now vice president, he pushed for stricter border control, supported aggressive policing policies, and echoed Trump's America First approach on the world stage. For him, traditional values and national strength mattered more than international consensus or progressive diplomacy. So it was never just about immigration, it was about two visions for the world. Pope Francis imagined a world that tore down walls. JD Vance and Donald Trump campaigned on building them. And this conflict didn't stop at America's shores. Throughout his papacy, Pope Francis found himself clashing with other world leaders with the same ideologies too. In Brazil, President Jair Bolsonaro once lashed out at the Pope after Francis condemned deforestation in the Amazon. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán pushed back strongly when the Pope criticized the country's treatment of Muslim refugees. Even in Italy, Pope Francis has faced criticism over issues relating to native Italians. These weren't small disputes. They were public, pointed, and persistent. Pope Francis spoke up for the marginalized, even if it meant standing alone. Now, with all of that history in mind, JD Vance's recent words, spoken just hours after the Pope's death, take on a much deeper meaning. Because, as we'll show you next, Vance didn't just reflect on a brief handshake. He said something that has the world talking. Stay tuned. Understanding Pope Francis. Now, we have to first understand why Pope Francis was the way he was. His values didn't come out of nowhere. They weren't political stunts or last-minute strategies. They were shaped by a lifetime of witnessing suffering, inequality, and the deep consequences of ignoring those on the margins of society. Everything he stood for, his criticism of power, his empathy for the poor, his commitment to social justice, was rooted in his personal journey. And that journey began long before he wore the white robes of the papacy. He was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio on December 17, 1936, in Flores, a working-class neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Argentina. His parents were Italian immigrants, Mario José Bergoglio and Regina Maria Sivori, who raised him with deep Catholic values and a strong sense of humility. From a young age, Jorge experienced firsthand what it meant to live simply. He wasn't a child of privilege. He worked as a bouncer, a janitor, and once ran tests in a chemical lab. These weren't the kind of early years one might expect for a future pope, but they grounded him in real-world struggles. In 1958, he joined the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, an order known for its intellectual rigor and devotion to the poor. It was a decision that would shape everything that came afterward. He officially became a Jesuit priest in 1969, and by 1973 he was appointed provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina. That was a critical time, not just for him but for his country. Argentina was slipping into a brutal military dictatorship, a period marked by forced disappearances, torture, and government terror. Father Bergoglio found himself facing the impossible: how to protect people in secret while keeping the church alive in public. To this day, some debate his exact role during those dark years, but what's not up for debate is how it shaped him. He saw how easily power could become violence. He watched neighbors vanish. He learned that neutrality in the face of injustice was not an option. From then on, his sermons, his leadership, and his philosophy became anchored in one principle: speak for the voiceless, even when it's dangerous. By the time he became Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998, Bergoglio had earned a reputation for riding the bus, living in a small apartment, and cooking his own meals. He refused the luxuries that came with high church office, saying again and again that the church must be of the poor and for the poor. In a city plagued by slums and economic inequality, he walked among the people, not above them. And the people loved him for it. Then came March 13th, 2013. After the unexpected resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, the conclave of cardinals elected Jorge Mario Bergoglio as the 266th Pope. He chose the name Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, a man who renounced wealth and lived in solidarity with the poor. That choice alone said everything. He wasn't coming to continue tradition, he was coming to challenge it. From that moment, he became a pope like no other. He declined to live in the luxurious apostolic palace, choosing instead a modest suite in the Vatican guest house. He washed the feet of Muslim refugees on Holy Thursday. He opened Vatican properties to house the homeless. He visited prisons, war zones, and impoverished villages. And when asked why he always reached for the suffering, he simply said, "It is because that is where Christ is." So when he condemned the immigration raids proposed by the Trump-Vance team, it wasn't about politics. It was about values that had defined him long before he ever stood on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. He wasn't performing either. He was being consistent with a life built on compassion and confrontation with injustice. But for all his strength in values and moral clarity, Pope Francis was still very much human, and over time, that humanity began to show more clearly through his physical health. In recent years, the world watched as he pushed through a long series of health challenges, but never once stepping away from his calling. It really began drawing attention around 2021, when he underwent colon surgery at Rome's Gemelli Hospital. It was a planned operation, but still a major one for an aging pontiff. The procedure was to treat a condition that affects the large intestine and can cause serious pain and digestive issues. The surgery was declared a success, but recovery was slow. He stayed in the hospital for over a week, and even afterward, he often looked more frail than before. Then came the chronic pain in his right knee. By early 2022, it was obvious he was struggling. He started using a wheelchair more frequently and had to cancel or reduce his participation in several high-profile events. In fact, he once joked during an audience that he needed tequila for the pain, a light moment that couldn't completely hide the seriousness of his condition. Behind the scenes, Vatican doctors were trying everything: therapy, injections, rest. But the mobility issues persisted. Despite all this, he kept going. He visited Canada in July 2022 for a deeply emotional apology tour, acknowledging the Catholic Church's role in the abuse of Indigenous children in residential schools. He delivered speeches while seated, often visibly tired, but still chose to go rather than cancel. That's who he was, driven by duty, even when his body was clearly pushing back. And yet, his health kept getting more complicated. In March 2023, he was hospitalized again with what the Vatican initially called a respiratory infection. It turned out to be bronchitis, and while he responded well to antibiotics, it was another reminder that the 86-year-old Pope was dealing with more than just the aches of old age. It wasn't long before rumors started circulating again about possible resignation, secret diagnoses, even urgent emergency care. None were confirmed, but the uncertainty kept growing. Later that year, in June 2023, he went under the knife once again, this time for abdominal surgery to remove scar tissue from his previous operation. Doctors called it a laparotomy, a fairly invasive procedure for someone his age. Once more, he recovered. But his public appearances were now shorter, more spaced out. He often read his speeches while seated, and his voice, once strong and passionate, began sounding more fatigued, more fragile. Even in 2024, he kept pressing forward. He still met world leaders, he still wrote letters and delivered blessings, but you could see that he was slowing down. That same year, he skipped multiple traditional events, including the Way of the Cross on Good Friday at the Colosseum, a rare decision that showed just how deeply his health was affecting him. Then came January 2025, when he gave that rare and sharp interview on Italian television, calling the proposed immigration raids a disgrace. It was the kind of bold language he had used before, but this time it came from someone visibly exhausted. Those close to him said he had been resting more, speaking less, and showing signs of discomfort during private audiences. His aides were reportedly limiting his schedule. And then, just one day after his final meeting, one that happened to be with Vice President-elect JD Vance, he passed away. The Vatican announced his death as the result of complications related to his recent illnesses. They did not elaborate. There was no suggestion of foul play, no immediate controversy, but the timing was so close to that unusual private meeting. And given the Pope's ongoing battles, both physical and ideological, sparked whispers across the globe. It left people wondering, what really happened in that meeting with JD Vance, and what could possibly have been said? Keep watching. There's more. The Pope's final meeting. The moment the Vatican confirmed Pope Francis had passed, the entire machinery of the Catholic Church swung into motion, an ancient yet precise rhythm of mourning, tradition, and transition. The death of a pope is not just the loss of a religious leader. It is the beginning of one of the most sacred and politically sensitive processes in the world, the election of his successor. Immediately, the Vatican issued the official notice. Black and white flags were raised over St. Peter's Basilica. The bells tolled. The Pope's ring, known as the Fisherman's Ring, was ceremoniously destroyed to prevent any unauthorized use. His papal apartment was sealed. And the mourning period, known as the Novem Dies, began. 9 days of elaborate masses and liturgies across Rome and the world. Crowds flooded Vatican City. Pilgrims, priests, journalists, and heads of state gathered. Pope Francis' body lay in state in St. Peter's Basilica, where hundreds of thousands filed past to pay their respects. His funeral was scheduled with high security, massive attendance, and global live coverage. Leaders from every continent will be expected. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Vatican, behind the ancient walls of the Apostolic Palace, the College of Cardinals began preparations for the conclave, which is the secretive and spiritual process of electing a new pope. There are 135 eligible voting cardinals under the age of 80. They will be confined in the Sistine Chapel, locked away without phones, internet, or contact with the outside world. Their task is to pray, discuss, and vote over and over again until one man receives a 2/3 majority and accepts the role as the next Bishop of Rome. There are no formal campaigns, but behind the scenes, alliances are forming. Names have already started floating through the corridors of the Curia. One top contender is Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, the Archbishop of Bologna, known for his progressive views and deep ties to peace negotiations in Africa. A Francis ally, he represents continuity. Another is Cardinal Peter Erdo of Hungary, a conservative theologian with sharp intellect and deep concern for maintaining doctrinal purity. He would signal a return to a more traditional Catholicism, possibly pleasing many of the Church's conservative factions. Then there's Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, D.C., the first African-American cardinal. His election would be historic, though it is less likely due to Church geopolitics. The Vatican is deeply influenced by Catholic strongholds in Europe, Latin America, and Africa. These regions tend to lean toward a more traditional approach to faith and the role of the Church, so they might view the election of an American cardinal with some hesitation, if not outright reluctance. Also, the Church has long been cautious about selecting a pope from a country like the U.S. Among other things, the United States is often seen as a symbol of liberalism and secularism, which contrasts with the Catholic Church's mission of promoting traditional religious values and moral conservatism. This could make Gregory's election even more complicated, especially when the next pope will have to unify a diverse and sometimes divided church, including factions that hold on to more conservative views on faith and morality, particularly in Europe and the global South. However, his moral clarity and calm leadership style have drawn admiration. Every cardinal brings a vision, and every vote casts a future. The debate behind those closed doors will center not only on doctrine, but also on how to guide 1.4 billion Catholics through a chaotic world of nationalism, climate crisis, war, poverty, and declining church attendance in the West. The next pope could shape global politics for years. And yet, in all the speculation and solemnity, whispers of one final meeting still linger. The private audience between Pope Francis and Vice President JD Vance was brief, and as Vance himself would later reveal to the world, the tone was not what you would expect given their history. It was unexpectedly warm. Speaking to reporters days later in India, Vance downplayed their past disagreements. "I think it was a great blessing," he said. "I told him I prayed for him every day. I did, and I do." That alone struck many as surprising. Vance had long been a sharp voice on the American right, firmly aligned with Trump's more conservative policies, especially on immigration. These are policies that Pope Francis publicly criticized, calling a disgrace. But the Pope didn't raise politics in that meeting. He didn't even argue, and he didn't lecture. Instead, he made a request. And just like that, the Pope was gone. At the moment, the world waits for a new leader. JD Vance's recent comments about Pope Francis have gotten a lot of attention around the world. While some expect something different, that's not really the case. Instead, what Vice President Vance revealed is a meaningful and respectful reflection on their meeting. There were no hidden truths or scandals, just a moment of warmth and admiration. Vance even considers himself lucky to have met the Pope just before his passing. This moment has many people thinking about its significance and what it means. What do you think about JD Vance's comments on Pope Francis? Do you agree with how he described their meeting? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it,